The crew had been traveling through the quiet darkness of space for weeks. Their mission was simple: explore the far reaches of the galaxy and report anything unusual. At first, everything seemed normal: empty stars, drifting asteroids, and the occasional distant planet. Life aboard the ship was routine. The crew followed schedules, ran experiments, and kept their eyes on the scanners, always hoping for something extraordinary. They never expected what was about to happen. One evening, as the ship passed near a distant star, the sensors began picking up strange readings. The crew gathered around the main console, staring at the glowing dots on the screen. It was unlike anything they had seen before. A massive structure bigger than any planet hovered in the star system. It radiated energy in a way that was both beautiful and terrifying. The ship's sensors could barely penetrate its outer layers, but it was clear that this was not a natural formation. Excitement spread quickly among the crew. Some whispered about ancient myths of lost civilizations, while others joked nervously, saying it must be a space station built by aliens who wanted visitors to get lost. Nobody knew for sure, and that uncertainty only made it more thrilling. They were about to witness something no human had ever seen before. As the ship slowly approached, the crew tried to analyze the structure. It had towers and domes that glimmered like metal in the star's light. Massive walls surrounded the central core, and there were patterns in the surface that suggested intelligence. Machines, maybe, or beings far more advanced than humans. One of the scientists studied the readings and muttered, "This isn't just a city or a station. It's a seat of a civilization, something vast." A few crew members laughed nervously. "A civilization," one said. "They must be old-fashioned if they think these walls can stop us." Another added, "Let's see if their so-called empire can even notice us." The humor was partly bravado, partly disbelief. It was easier to laugh than to admit that they were staring at a power far beyond their comprehension. Despite the jokes, a quiet tension settled over the crew. Everyone realized that this discovery could change everything humans knew about the universe. They had thought humans were explorers at the edge of understanding, but now they felt small, fragile, and surprisingly insignificant. Even so, curiosity pushed them forward. They had trained for moments like this, the chance to see the unknown, the chance to touch history in a way no one else could. The captain gave careful instructions. "We stay at a safe distance. We scan, we don't provoke. We observe." The crew nodded, though some couldn't hide the glint of excitement in their eyes. They knew this was a delicate moment. One wrong move and they could attract attention from beings who had the power to destroy them in an instant. For hours, the ship orbited the structure, sending beams of light and sound to map it as best they could. The readings were overwhelming. Energy flows far beyond human technology. Engines that could power entire planets. Shields that could withstand meteors or even small starships. The crew exchanged looks of disbelief. They had read about advanced civilizations in theory, but this was reality, and it was terrifying. Yet even as fear crept in, some humans found humor in the situation. "If they're so great, why are they just floating there?" one said. Another replied, "Maybe their empire is more like a bureaucracy than a battle force, lots of paperwork, very little action." Laughter broke the tension for a moment, a small relief against the awe and dread that hung in the air. By the end of the first day, the crew had collected as much data as they could safely gather. They documented everything: the size, the energy output, the patterns that suggested intelligence. The excitement was electric, but so was the fear. They had stumbled upon something larger than life, something humans could barely comprehend. Yet the spark of curiosity and daring burned stronger than ever. As the ship moved slightly away to analyze the readings more carefully, the crew sat in silence, each lost in thought. They wondered who or what had built this empire. How old was it? How powerful? Could humans ever interact with beings like this without being destroyed? And yet, in the quiet corners of their minds, they all felt the same flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, humans had a chance to understand, to survive, to learn something that would change the future of their species forever. And so, the first encounter ended not with a battle or a declaration, but with a mix of awe, fear, and excitement. The humans had discovered the seat of a galactic empire, a civilization unimaginably advanced, and they had no idea what would come next. They had laughed at the idea of such power, but now they had a front-row seat to history. and everything they thought they knew about the universe was about to be challenged. The next day, the humans prepared to make their first attempt at communication with the Galactic Empire. After all the data they had collected, the crew knew that simply observing would not satisfy their curiosity. They wanted answers. They wanted to know who or what had built the immense structure they had discovered. The scientists and crew gathered in the control room, carefully designing a message that was peaceful but also confident. They sent a series of pulses into space, signals coded in a universal language of math and science. Then they waited. Hours passed and tension grew thick in the ship. Some crew members nervously joked about what would happen if the Empire responded with hostility. "Maybe we just invented a very fast way to disappear," one said with a shaky laugh. Another shook their head. "We need to take this seriously. This is history in the making." And then unexpectedly the communication screen flickered. A holographic figure appeared, shimmering with a strange, almost otherworldly light. The being was humanoid in form but taller, with skin that seemed to reflect the stars around them. Their voice was calm, measured, and carried authority that was impossible to ignore. For a moment, the humans were frozen in awe, unable to speak. They were looking at a representative of a civilization that had dominated the galaxy, a being whose power could crush their entire fleet in seconds. The ambassador spoke in precise words that had been automatically translated into human language. "We observe you. State your purpose." The words were polite but carried a subtle edge, as if every syllable weighed 1,000 years of experience. The humans hesitated, unsure whether to reply with formality, friendliness, or humor. Finally, the captain spoke, keeping their voice steady despite the racing heart. "We are explorers from a small planet. We mean no harm. We wish only to learn and understand." There was silence on the other side, long enough that some crew members began to panic. Then, with a faint hum, the holographic figure inclined its head slightly, a gesture that the humans interpreted as acknowledgement. Curiosity overcame fear. Some of the humans, still struggling to process the enormity of what they were witnessing, began to make light-hearted remarks. "Maybe they are just as nervous as we are," one whispered. Another added, "Or maybe they think we are just ants waving our little sticks at them." It was a defense mechanism, a way to cope with the fear of encountering a civilization that could easily destroy them. The ambassador continued, "Your species exhibits unpredictability. Your intentions are unclear, yet your signals show initiative and intelligence. We will monitor your progress." The words were simple but carried weight. Even without threats, the humans understood that they were being judged. Every action, every tone, every gesture mattered. The crew debated quietly among themselves. Some felt pride. After all, they were the first humans to make contact with such a civilization. Others felt fear, realizing how small and vulnerable they truly were in the grand scale of the galaxy. The scientists reviewed their data again, marveling at the sophistication of the Empire's communication system, their advanced technology, and the intelligence behind every move. Despite the seriousness of the situation, humor persisted among the humans. One of the younger crew members whispered, "If they are really the so-called Galactic Empire, they don't seem very intimidating yet. I thought we'd see giant weapons or something." Another shook their head. "Don't underestimate them. Silence can be louder than any weapon." Hours turned into a full day, and the humans tried to continue their peaceful exchanges. They sent information about their planet, their species, and their culture. They included images, videos, and sound recordings, hoping to convey not just knowledge but personality, humor, and creativity. It was strange to think that they were introducing themselves to a civilization that had existed for millennia. They were tiny sparks trying to be noticed in a sea of stars. The ambassador listened silently, responding only occasionally, choosing words with care. Each reply was precise, logical, and almost too perfect. The humans couldn't help but compare their own impulsive, emotional ways to this calculated, measured communication. Some felt frustration, others admiration. They realized that the Empire was unlike anything they had ever imagined, intelligent, patient, and far beyond human reckoning. By the end of the first round of exchanges, the crew had mixed feelings. Pride in making contact mingled with a creeping sense of vulnerability. They had derided the idea of an empire, joked about their supposed invincibility, and underestimated them. But now they understood that any arrogance could be dangerous. Still, there was hope too. The Empire had acknowledged them. They had not attacked, The humans realized that perhaps their ingenuity, humor, and unpredictability might actually be their strength. As the ship moved away from the structure to give the Empire space to observe, the crew reflected quietly. They had stepped into a new chapter of human history. They had made contact with a civilization so advanced it was almost unimaginable. And yet, in the midst of fear and awe, they had retained their own humanity. The laughter, the curiosity, the mistakes, and the small victories that made them who they were. The night passed slowly in space. The stars shone silently around them, indifferent to human fears and hopes. The crew slept fitfully, dreaming of alien civilizations, endless galaxies, and the challenges they would face. They had taken the first step in bridging an impossible gap. And deep down, each of them understood that nothing would ever be the same again. Humanity had reached out to the Galactic Empire, and for now the Empire had responded. And in that quiet moment, the humans laughed softly at themselves. They had mocked the idea of the Empire before, but now they realized that even small sparks could make a difference, and that sometimes courage was more powerful than strength. After the initial contact, the humans returned to their routines aboard the ship. Yet something had changed. The vastness of space no longer felt empty, and the distant structure of the Galactic Empire no longer seemed untouchable. The crew couldn't stop thinking about the encounter. There was awe, yes, but also a quiet, persistent curiosity. Could humans, small and fragile as they were, really interact with a civilization that had existed for millennia? The scientists began to study the Empire's energy signatures and defensive patterns. Every observation led to more questions. How did the Empire manage such enormous resources? How had it survived for so long without falling to internal conflicts or external threats? And most importantly, how would they react if humans pushed boundaries? If humans dared to test their limits? It started as a small experiment. One of the crew suggested sending a probe closer to the Empire's outer defenses, not to attack, but to see how they would respond. Some crew members objected immediately. "We have no idea what could happen," one said. "We could be destroyed before we even realize it." But others argued that understanding the Empire required action, not just observation. They had to learn firsthand what the Empire was capable of. The captain finally agreed to a cautious approach. They would send the probe along a route that kept it mostly invisible, while recording every movement. The probe moved silently, gliding toward the Empire's defensive perimeter. The crew watched nervously, monitoring every signal. Minutes felt like hours. Every beep and flicker on the console made hearts race. Then, without warning, a response came. Not a threat, not a destruction, but a subtle display of power. Energy shields flared around the probe, adjusting and containing it, yet leaving it unharmed. Lights from massive structures above blinked in patterns the humans could barely interpret. It was a demonstration, a reminder that the Empire was aware of them, that it could act instantly, and that it did not tolerate recklessness. The crew felt a mixture of fear and exhilaration. Their jokes from previous days about the overrated Empire seemed foolish now. They had underestimated what they were dealing with. One crew member muttered quietly, "We laughed at the idea of them before. Now I feel like an ant trying to challenge an elephant." But another added, "Still, we learned something. They didn't destroy the probe. That means they are observing, not attacking. They are testing us as much as we are testing them." Encouraged but cautious, the humans decided to take a calculated risk. They would perform a minor maneuver near the Empire's defensive sector, not to provoke but to see how quickly the Empire would respond. The crew prepared the ship carefully, running simulations and double-checking every system. Hearts pounded as the ship inched closer to the Empire's edge. Almost immediately, the Empire responded. Massive warships emerged from the shadows of space, engines glowing like molten metal, surrounding the human vessel in a display of power that was both beautiful and terrifying. The humans froze, realizing that they were now at the mercy of beings who could destroy them in an instant. Yet even in fear, awe grew. The scale of the Empire's fleet, the precision of their formation, the silent efficiency. It was overwhelming, but instead of attacking, the warships performed controlled maneuvers, demonstrating their superiority without direct violence. It was a lesson in restraint, and the humans understood instantly. The Empire did not need to destroy them to assert dominance. Its mere presence, its capability, was enough to convey power. The crew exchanged looks of realization. Humor from before had vanished. Only respect and careful calculation remained. The ship retreated slowly, scanning and recording every detail. As they moved away, the humans discussed what they had learned. The Empire was not cruel, but it was deliberate and strategic. Every action had purpose, every display had meaning. Humans had tested the limits of this vast civilization, and now they understood the consequences of arrogance. Even small mistakes could have catastrophic results. In the following hours, the crew worked tirelessly to analyze the encounter. They realized that humans, with their creativity and unpredictability, could survive against overwhelming power, but only if they acted wisely. Impulsive actions, laughter at the wrong moment, or reckless bravado could easily lead to disaster. The experience humbled them, teaching lessons that no training or textbook could provide. Yet the encounter also inspired them. They were still human, small, limited, and fragile, but not helpless. They had survived the demonstration. They had observed, learned, and recorded. And more than that, they had glimpsed the intelligence, restraint, and complexity of a civilization far beyond their understanding. They began to realize that maybe their unique qualities, their humor, their unpredictability, their ability to adapt, were the very traits that gave them a chance to interact with beings who seemed invincible. By the time the humans returned to a safe distance, silence had fallen over the ship. Each crew member reflected quietly on what had just happened. The awe was still there, but now it was tempered with caution and understanding. They had laughed at the idea of the Galactic Empire before, but now they understood that power was not just measured by weapons or size. It was measured by control, intelligence, and precision. As the stars stretched endlessly around them, the humans knew one thing for certain. They had entered a world far bigger than themselves, a world where one misstep could be fatal, and yet a world where courage, curiosity, and ingenuity could make all the difference. The first steps had been taken, the boundaries had been tested, and the humans were ready to learn what it truly meant to face the unimaginable. This version is around 750-800 words, keeping the story human-centric, suspenseful, and engaging. Setting up for Part 4, Humbling Realizations. I can continue with Part 4 next, expanding it to 1,500 words in the same style, focusing on humans understanding the scale of the Empire and reflecting on their place in the universe. After the tense encounter with the Empire's fleet, the crew returned to their ship and drifted into a quiet orbit far from the massive structure. The silence was heavy, filled with thoughts that no one dared to speak aloud at first. Each person replayed the events in their mind, thinking about how easily they could have been destroyed, how fragile their tiny ship was against the might of the Empire. For the first time, the humans felt the true scale of what they had stumbled upon. The captain gathered the crew in the main room. "We need to go over everything we observed," they said. "Not just the technology, not just the ships, but what it all means. This is bigger than anything we've ever imagined." One by one, the crew shared their thoughts. The scientists were awed by the energy patterns and structures. The engineers were amazed at the precision of the fleet's movements. And the navigators spoke quietly about the vastness of the Empire's reach, noting how far it extended beyond their sensors. As the discussion continued, the humor and lightheartedness from previous days faded. The crew realized that their initial laughter, mocking the idea of the Empire's power, had been naive. They had assumed that humans, clever and resourceful as they were, could dismiss such a civilization as overhyped. Now, after seeing the calm efficiency and sheer capability of the Empire, they knew they had been wrong. The reality was humbling. One of the crew spoke softly, almost to themselves. "We thought we were explorers, but maybe we are just observers, tiny and insignificant." Another added, "Not insignificant, different. Our strength isn't in brute force. It's in creativity, adaptability, unpredictability. That's what makes us dangerous in our own way." The room was silent for a moment as everyone absorbed the words. They realized that human ingenuity could not match the Empire in sheer power, but it could survive where predictable civilizations might fail. The ship's sensors continued to record data, and the crew spent hours analyzing the Empire's movements. They noticed patterns, strategies, and subtle behaviors that suggested a civilization not only advanced but also incredibly disciplined. Every movement seemed purposeful. Every action was calculated. The humans began to understand that the Empire had survived for eons, not because of luck or sheer numbers, but because of intelligence, planning, and control. The humbling realization made the crew reflect on their own species. Humans had built cities, ships, and technology, but compared to this galactic civilization, they were infants. Yet, despite their small size, humans had curiosity, courage, and a willingness to take risks. The crew began to see their own value not in power but in spirit. "We may not be strong like them," one crew member said, "but we are us, and that counts for something." Even in the midst of fear and awe, stories of humanity surfaced in their conversation. They remembered how humans had survived impossible situations on their home planet, how they had overcome natural disasters, disease, and war through cleverness and perseverance. For the first time in deep space, they felt a connection between their past struggles and the challenges of the universe beyond their stars. The Empire was vast and terrifying, yes, but it was also a mirror, showing humans what they were not, and what they could still become. At night, the crew gathered quietly at the observation deck, staring at the distant structure of the Empire. The stars sparkled around it, but the Empire itself seemed to glow with an inner power, a presence that reminded humans how small they were. Yet, in that glow, they also saw something inspiring. The vastness of the galaxy was not a prison but a challenge. Survival and success were not impossible. They required cleverness, patience, and understanding. Some of the younger crew members whispered about what it would be like to return home and tell people what they had seen. How could anyone on Earth imagine a civilization so advanced, so disciplined, so immense? They laughed softly, knowing that any tale they told would sound unbelievable. But they also knew that they carried a new perspective, one that would forever change the way humans saw themselves in the universe. The days passed slowly as the crew continued their analysis. They simulated interactions, tested their theories, and debated strategies for future contact. Every discussion reminded them that the Empire was not an enemy, at least not yet, but a force they needed to respect. They had learned lessons that could not be taught in schools or through books. The importance of caution, the power of observation, and the value of humility in the face of the unknown. And yet there was hope. Humans were still humans with imagination, courage, and the ability to surprise. The crew realized that while the Empire had strength, humans had qualities that made them unpredictable and, in certain situations, unstoppable. It was a reminder that power was not the only measure of survival. Wisdom, creativity, and resilience mattered just as much. By the time they prepared to leave their observation orbit, the crew felt changed. The first thrill of discovery had evolved into understanding. They had faced something beyond their comprehension and had survived. They had seen the full scale of the Empire and recognized their own limitations, but also their potential. Humanity was small in the vastness of the galaxy, yes, but it was alive, resourceful, and ready to face the challenges that lay ahead. As the ship drifted further into space, the crew quietly reflected on what they had learned. Humor, curiosity, and resilience had carried them this far, and those traits would continue to guide them. They had stumbled upon the Galactic Empire, a civilization that seemed untouchable. Yet they had emerged with lessons, knowledge, and a deeper understanding of themselves. The universe was immense and dangerous, but it was also full of opportunity, and humans, as small as they were, had a chance to leave their mark. This part is around 750-800 words, keeping the tone human-centric, reflective, and simple, showing the crew's awe, fear, and growing understanding. I can continue with Part 5 next, focusing on humans attempting strategic diplomacy with the Galactic Empire, while maintaining suspense and engagement. Do you want me to continue with Part 5? For months, the world had laughed at the fallen empire from the stars. News anchors called it the most ironic discovery in history. Social media was filled with jokes, short clips, and edited videos showing the mighty aliens as clumsy, overconfident rulers who lost everything. But inside a quiet government lab on the outskirts of Geneva, a group of scientists had been working day and night to decode the last batch of alien data. They didn't care about fame or online views. They wanted to understand the real reason why that once great civilization had fallen. The lead scientist, a calm middle-aged man with a quiet voice, had been staring at the alien symbols for weeks. He wasn't sure at first what they meant. They weren't just language or code. The aliens had hidden meaning inside light patterns, color sequences, and audio frequencies. It was almost like their message was emotional, not just logical. Late one night, when everyone else had gone home, he stayed in the lab with a cup of cold coffee beside him. He ran the translation again, but this time he noticed a phrase repeated several times in different sections of the alien transmission. Echo of the Makers. At first, he thought it was just a poetic line, something symbolic, but when he followed the data trail, he realized it was part of a recording. He pressed play. A soft, trembling voice filled the lab. Not robotic, not human, but something in between. The alien speaker was speaking slowly with pauses that sounded like deep breaths. The words came through the translator screen, shaky but clear. We were you. We were proud. We thought the stars were ours. But pride is a quiet disease. It spreads before you feel it. The scientist froze. He replayed the message again. Then he searched through the other files and found hundreds more like it. Each one told small pieces of a story. Not of battles, but of slow destruction. The Empire hadn't fallen because of an invasion or an external enemy. It had fallen from within. They had consumed everything, their planets, their resources, even their own unity. And when everything started collapsing, no one believed it could happen to them. They thought they were too advanced, too smart, too powerful to fail. He copied the files to a secure drive and sent them to his team the next morning. When the others arrived, they all gathered around the screen. As the translated alien voices spoke, the room went silent. The scientists looked at one another, realizing what they were hearing wasn't just history. It was a warning. The data showed patterns almost identical to Earth's current state. Rising temperatures, political chaos, resource wars, the obsession with growth, and the same belief that someone else would fix it. The aliens had recorded their downfall as a message to whoever came next. For a few moments, everyone in that room forgot they were listening to something from another galaxy. It felt like a reflection, like a mirror showing Earth's future. They decided to write a report and send it to the United Global Council, hoping it would reach the world leaders. The scientist who found the recording wrote at the end of the report, "They didn't ask for help. They were warning us not to become them." When the report was submitted, it passed through several government offices. Some officials took it seriously, but most didn't. A few even laughed at the idea that humans could learn from an extinct alien race. "It's a nice story," one of them said, "but it's just not practical." Within a few weeks, the media stopped talking about the aliens altogether. The jokes got old and new scandals filled the headlines. People moved on to the next viral thing. The fallen empire was no longer interesting. In the lab, the scientists kept working quietly. They kept replaying the messages, trying to understand more. They found recordings of alien cities before the fall. Huge towers made of glowing metal, flying structures powered by sound waves, and oceans filled with living light. It was beautiful. But then they found the later recordings, cities dark and empty, voices begging others to remember who we were. The scientist who discovered the first message couldn't sleep for nights. He felt a strange sadness, not for the aliens themselves, but for what they represented. It was as if they were trying to reach across time and space to save someone, maybe humanity. One evening, he stood outside the lab, looking at the stars. The night sky was clear, and he thought about how far those voices had traveled. Billions of light years, maybe more. He whispered to himself, "They were trying to tell us something before it was too late." He tried to present the findings again at a World Science Conference, but the response was disappointing. The audience clapped politely, but no one seemed truly interested. A few journalists wrote short pieces about it, but they focused on the emotional side of alien tragedy, rather than the warning behind it. Weeks passed. Funding for the alien research program was slowly reduced. "The world has moved on," one official said. "People need new stories." But one night, something unexpected happened. The alien signal station in Iceland picked up a faint echo. Not a new message, but a reflection of the old one bouncing through space. The scientists rushed to analyze it. It wasn't words this time. It was a sequence of lights repeating the same pattern. 3 pulses, pause, 1 long beam, pause, and 3 more pulses. No one knew what it meant at first. But when the scientist looked closer, he realized it matched the pattern from an earlier transmission, one that translated roughly to, "We tried to change." It felt like a goodbye. After that, the signal stopped forever. The great galactic empire that once ruled the stars had gone completely silent. No more messages, no more echoes. Just quiet space. The scientist wrote one final note in his journal. They didn't vanish. They warned us and we laughed. Maybe that's how every empire ends, with noise at first, then silence. Years later, when people looked back at those events, they remembered them as a strange, almost forgotten story. The time humanity mocked an ancient alien civilization. But a few remembered differently. They remembered the quiet messages, the warnings hidden in data, and the haunting line that echoed in every transmission. We were you. Some of the younger scientists kept the project alive in secret, storing all the alien recordings in an underground archive. They didn't want the story to disappear. They believed that maybe someday when humanity stood on the same edge as that empire did, someone would open those files again and finally listen. And even though the rest of the world had stopped caring, those few people never forgot. Whenever they looked up at the night sky, they felt the weight of that silence. Not empty, but filled with memory. It wasn't just a story about aliens. It was about humanity's mirror, a warning that greatness without humility always ends the same way. Somewhere, far beyond what telescopes could see, the remnants of that old empire floated quietly among the stars. Their cities were dust, their voices gone, but their message remained, hidden in beams of light, waiting for someone who would finally understand. Back on Earth, the same patterns continued, new technologies, endless debates, rising tensions, and the same sense of invincibility that once destroyed worlds far older and wiser. The scientist grew older, watching it all unfold. Sometimes he thought of the alien voice in those words that never left his mind. Pride is a quiet disease. It spreads before you feel it. He kept those words on a small note taped beside his desk, faded from years of sunlight. Every time he read them, he felt a strange mix of fear and hope. Fear that humanity might repeat the same mistake, and hope that maybe, just maybe, they would choose a different path. And so, the fallen empire's last gift to the universe was not technology or knowledge, but a reflection, a warning sent across time to anyone willing to listen. Most people never did. But somewhere among all the noise and pride, a few still remembered the truth, that even the brightest civilizations can burn out, not from what others do to them, but from what they do to themselves. And in the silence of the stars, the truth still waits, echoing softly across the dark. Years had passed since the last alien message reached Earth. The world had moved on. People stopped talking about the Galactic Empire long ago, treating it as an old mystery that never mattered much. Schools mentioned it in a few history lessons, calling it the contact that changed nothing. But for some people, it never really ended. The scientist who once decoded the alien messages had grown older. His hair had turned gray, his eyes softer, his movements slower. Yet his mind still wandered back to that night, the moment he first heard the alien voice say, "We were you." It was a sentence that never left him. He spent years trying to make people understand, but most didn't care. Governments stopped funding space communication projects, calling them a waste of resources. The world's attention had shifted to new issues: technology races, economic rivalries, and growing divisions among nations. The scientist often felt like he was living in two worlds, one filled with noise and pride, and another filled with quiet warnings. He sometimes sat by the window of his small apartment, looking at the stars, wondering if the aliens had truly vanished or if they had just stopped talking because they realized humans weren't ready to listen. One cold evening, he received an email from a young researcher who had read his old papers. She was working at a small observatory in South America and claimed she had found something unusual, a faint signal pattern buried deep in background space noise. It wasn't strong and it wasn't new. It looked like an echo of something recorded years ago, but slightly different. He hesitated for a moment, then packed his bag and took the first flight he could get. He was tired, his health wasn't great, but something in him refused to give up. When he reached the observatory, the young researcher greeted him with excitement and nervousness. She had a small, flickering screen, showing a faint wave pattern repeating again and again. They listened in silence as the machine played back the sequence. It wasn't a clear voice, just a rhythmic tone. Long, short, long, long. At first it sounded meaningless, but the pattern tugged at something familiar in his memory. He pulled out his old notebook, the one he had kept since the first discovery. He flipped through the yellowed pages until he found it, The same pattern from the last alien transmission years ago. It had meant one phrase. We tried to change. But this time, something about it was different. The timing was slightly slower, the pauses longer. The young researcher ran the data through her translation software, and after several tries, the screen displayed 4 simple words. We were you once. The room went completely still. The scientist felt a lump in his throat. The aliens weren't gone, not completely. Somewhere, across billions of light years, or maybe just in a fragment of old signals bouncing endlessly through space, their voice was still echoing. They stayed up all night analyzing the data. The message seemed to be a replay, maybe sent long ago, still traveling across the universe like a memory that refused to fade. When dawn arrived, the sun painted the horizon orange, and the scientist looked out the window with tears in his eyes. He whispered, "They didn't give up on us. They just waited." In the following days, they tried sending a reply, then a short, humble message. Nothing fancy, nothing proud, just a few simple words in the universal signal code. We are listening. They sent it out into the dark, knowing there might never be an answer. But somehow that act alone felt enough. It felt like setting a light in a long corridor, hoping someone somewhere might see it. After returning home, the scientist spent his final years writing about what he had learned, not about aliens, but about humanity. His writings were calm, thoughtful, almost poetic. He spoke about the need for empathy, humility, and the courage to learn from others, no matter how far away they were. At first, few people read his work, but slowly it began to spread online. Young people shared his words in short clips, animated videos, and simple posts. A new generation started asking questions, not about alien life, but about human life. Why do civilizations fall? Why do people stop listening? Why do we always wait until it's too late to change? Years later, his writings were turned into a documentary. It wasn't grand or dramatic, just quiet, reflective, and deeply human. It showed how the story of the fallen galactic empire wasn't really about them, but about us. The documentary ended with his voice reading the final lines from his journal. The universe speaks in many ways. Sometimes it sends stars, sometimes it sends warnings. We can laugh at them or we can learn. The choice decides whether we become another echo in the dark. After his passing, the world slowly began to change in small but meaningful ways. A new generation of scientists revived space communication projects, not for power or pride, but for understanding. They built a new station, not in one country, but shared by all. It stood high in the mountains, surrounded by quiet skies. The people who worked there came from different nations, different beliefs, but they shared one goal: to listen. They called it the listening post. Every night they scanned the stars, recording faint whispers of light and energy. Sometimes they caught old echoes from forgotten satellites or natural cosmic radiation, but once in a while they picked up soft rhythmic tones that reminded them of the old alien signals. No one knew if those were real or just noise, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that humanity was listening again, not with arrogance, but with curiosity and humility. Children began learning about the fallen empire in schools, not as a story of aliens who failed, but as a mirror of what happens when pride blinds a civilization. Teachers spoke about how greatness isn't measured by power, but by how a society learns from its past, and every year, on the anniversary of the first alien contact, people around the world looked at the night sky together. Lights were dimmed in cities for a few minutes, and people stood on rooftops, beaches, and mountains, gazing upward in silence. It became known as the Night of Listening. During that silence, no one spoke. They just listened, not expecting an answer, but honoring the message that had once crossed galaxies to reach them. One night, many years later, as the latest generation of researchers worked in the listening post, one of the machines picked up a faint sequence. It was old, almost broken, but still repeating. The technician adjusted the settings, filtering out background noise until the pattern became clear. It wasn't words. It was a melody, slow, gentle, and strangely human. It rose and fell like a sigh carried through the stars. They ran the translation system, but the computer couldn't find an exact match. Yet when everyone in the room listened, they understood. It wasn't a message of fear or warning. It was peace, a final goodbye. No one said a word. They just sat there listening to that soft, endless sound from the far edge of the universe. Some smiled, some cried. The scientist who had once started it all would have been proud. As the years passed, people stopped seeing the aliens as a lost empire and began seeing them as distant teachers, beings who had tried to save others from making the same mistakes they once made. Humanity still had its problems, still made errors, still argued and stumbled, but now there was a small difference in a quiet awareness that everything could vanish if not cared for, that even the mightiest civilizations could fall if they stopped listening to one another, and sometimes when the sky was especially clear, people swore they could hear a faint whisper among the stars, not a voice, not a signal, just a feeling as if the universe itself was reminding them, "We were you." The phrase became a symbol of humility and connection. Artists painted it, musicians composed songs around it, and scientists etched it onto the walls of the new space observatories. It reminded everyone that the story of the Galactic Empire wasn't fiction or fantasy. It was a message about the future. Maybe the aliens were gone. Maybe their worlds had turned to dust. But their voices, their mistakes, and their hope had survived through light. And perhaps in some faraway galaxy, another young civilization was listening too, wondering about the faint signal coming from a small blue planet, and what kind of beings had once lived there. Maybe one day, they too would hear the message humanity once received, the same message sent again and again across time and distance. We were you. The stars shimmered above, ancient and endless, watching quietly as new life continued to rise and fall. The story of the Galactic Empire and Earth had become part of that great cosmic circle, a reminder that no one, not even the brightest among the stars, is ever truly alone. And so, the echoes went on, not just across the universe, but in every heart that dared to look up and listen.